Good afternoon, welcome along to this meeting of the Community Wellbeing and Regulatory Committee. I'll declare the meeting open. Welcome those that are joining us on the live stream. There are no Zoom attendees at this point, but there is a possibility that Councillor Dermody may be zooming in from whichever part of the globe he's currently in. But I have apologies from Mayor Clark, Councillors Bond, Crackett, Boyle and Pottinger.
Move those apologies.
Move Leslie and Evelyn. Put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against. Carried. Are there any declarations of interest that anybody has? I'm very interested. Okay, no items of public forum. Let's get into it. We've got the minutes of the Community Wellbeing Committee held on Tuesday, 11th of June. Thanks very much to Councillor Campbell for chairing that. Would you like to move the minutes?
Yes, I'll move those minutes.
Seconder? Councillor Kett. Any matters arising? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. I'm happy to move the minutes of the District Licensing Committee through June.
Second those pro forma.
Thanks, Leslie. Any questions arising? Excellent, thank you for your faith. I'll put that. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. It was the decision making that I was still doing while I was offshore. Everything else I was away for. Youth Council update. So this time staff-led as opposed to the Youth Councillors who had a meeting last week. Who's leading? Danielle?
Yes, Councillor. I'll be speaking to the report in Rhiannon and Gemma's absence, and I've got Danielle here with me.
Can you just pull that mic in, please?
Is that better?
That's wonderful. Thank you.
So our youth council is now halfway through the calendar year, and they've had a very busy last quarter, so they are enjoying a well-deserved school holiday break at the moment. So in terms of highlights from the last quarter, and you'll be familiar with most of these, one of them is the Block Takeover Youth Festival, which occurred on the 18th of May. It was an absolute success, featuring a range of young musicians, notable speakers, food trucks, stalls from youth organisations and a panel discussion. As part of the 2024 Youth Week theme, we don't have it all together, but together we do have it all. Overall, there were 400 plus youth attendees, ages from 12 to 24. Another highlight for the Youth Council over the last quarter is participation in a play strategy workshop with our own Dr. Damien Paro. This happened in June, and our youth councillors were able to share some of the things that they appreciated about our cities, areas where they saw that we could improve, as well as potential enhancements to the city. Another highlight for our Youth Council is setting their committees and their committee goals. At the last meeting in June, the committee members were confirmed, and they've also started working on their projects for the year. 4 committees for 2024 are in place, and that's mental health and wellbeing, green environment, arts and creativity, and cultural activities. And the youth councillors will have 12 weeks excluding school holidays to complete their projects, and they're very much looking forward to sharing their progress on those projects with you at the next meeting. Another topic for discussion for our Youth Council recently has been around promoting set busking areas. It has come to their attention that there's been some confusion around the areas where busking is allowed and how to go about applying for a busking licence, whether there's specific areas and times and things like that. So they have suggested the need for clear communication and more of information to be made available to our public, so they know what to do should they want to bus in the city centre. And lastly, I just wanted to highlight that our youth councillors have supported a letter to elected members, and this is attached to your report as well, emphasising the importance of youth councils, and this was in light of the recent disestablishment of the Ashburton Youth Council, and they are advocating for the continued support and recognition of youth councils around New Zealand. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks. Steve?
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I love coming along to the Youth Council catch-ups. We come to every second one, so a lot of these conversations I've been a part of or I've been able to listen in on. Some I haven't, but just want to commend you on the Youth Council on the work that went into the block takeover. Really, really cool event to be a part of. But I'm just loving the thoughts that are coming out about things like the busking spaces as well. Really sharp thinking and great ideas that I think we should be paying real attention to. Just around the play strategy conversations that were happening, I was just interested more in the discussion around more bathrooms and spaces. I think you'd referred to them as it wasn't in here, but as bumping spaces. So I just wondered whether you could speak to that a wee bit more, creating spaces people stay in for longer.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Broad. So in community development principles, bumping spaces are places where people naturally end up. So supermarkets, post shops are good examples of bumping spaces. And so as a part of the strategy for play, the youth councillors were asked to think of places that they naturally come to and hang out, and if those spaces are safe, cool, do they want to be there? And a part of that discussion came that if there were more bathrooms available, they feel that they'd be willing to stay in those spaces for longer. And they felt that it would create more access for young parents as well, who may come with a variety of aged children and will require a bathroom often for the young one, but maybe not for the older one. And then within that, they thought the infrastructure of that could also support more Wi-Fi across the city, just to make those bumping spaces places where people want to stay.
Awesome, thank you.
Councillor Soper?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to also compliment Youth Council on the taking over the block. It was great. Real compliments. It was well organised. It was really interesting. It was good to see. And I just wanted to ask really about the busking area issue. Is that something we can formally pick up and do some work on through this committee? I'm just thinking it might be a task
I'm going to say it's probably a policy, Councillor Soper.
Yeah,
You know anyone who's associated with the policy committee?
I do. You may do. So I'm just hoping that
Either
we
us or here.
can
It's a really good point.
Yeah.
And you know, there's nothing like the vitality that comes from buskers. But if somebody pulls up a set of bagpipes and they're still learning, and they're outside your shop for 6 hours, it's going to drive you spare. But it's making sure that there are time limits and stuff like that, and that people are aware of them, because frankly I don't know if we have them or not, and that just says no, they're probably not aware. So yeah, we will figure out where we need to follow that up and do so.
Could we perhaps, or could I perhaps suggest that this committee could suggest to another committee that some action
We can
could
work
be
in
started?
conjunction.
We could work in conjunction.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Reverend Cook?
I'm so delighted our people can talk to our people. I was really taken with the bathroom Wi-Fi conversation, because I would never have put those two things in the same space, and to understand a little bit better about the safety aspect of more Wi-Fi in the city, because that had not occurred to me. I think only the library has, or perhaps individual businesses have.
No, I think we have it on Esk Street from memory.
Do we?
Yep.
So perhaps again that's something that there's a lack of awareness.
Oh, we did
It
have.
certainly is on my part.
Did you stop that, Trudy?
The GM is hiding her face apparently. So no, can I ask what made people think that it would make for more safety? I do understand that not everybody has extra credit on their phone sometimes when they need it, and I guess that is an issue. But are there other reasons why an increased amount of free Wi-Fi would be beneficial, particularly from the safety perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Reverend. I can speak to what I heard with the Youth Council conversation, but I think we might need to go back to Youth Council for more specifics around that. But it came down to accessibility, so being able to tell mum and dad where I am and them feel safe. And also a lot of youth use location services with their family and friends, and so that means that mum always knows I'm at Queen's Park and I don't need to text her every 30 minutes to say I haven't left Queen's Park and I'm still safe. All those types of things come into it, but it was mainly around giving youth independence to leave the home and be able to stay in contact and be safe in their spaces that they want to go to. Yeah.
That's most clarifying. Can I also comment and ask perhaps you to pass back to the Youth Council how excited I am to see that they're not just using the opportunity to do their own projects, but to get involved in other people's. So volunteering for can inspire. You know, what we are getting forward from Youth Council is actually inspiring me. So I just want that to be noted. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Reverend. I'll take that back to them.
As our, I can't call them children, kids were younger, they could tell you where to find the free Wi-Fi. And for that very reason, because they've used up all the credit on their phone with data without thinking about it because they don't pay for it. And it's quite central to how they feel and being able to keep in touch with their parents and how their parents feel about them being away. So, but then there are also user caveats as well, because I don't always feel secure on public access Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And just having been offshore, I didn't use any of it. I used my own data for everything that I did, which was a lot. But I'm in a privileged position where I have, you know, a large amount. I was really interested in the letter that our youth council has signed into, because I think they need to know that they are extremely valued by this council and have been for quite some time, actually. While we know that they are not the voice of youth, because youth are a diverse range of people, they are a voice, and quite often they present stuff that we haven't thought of or come from a position that we were not expecting, and it's truly important. And yet each council is very different in how it operates. This year, which has a lot of new people in it, is still finding its feet, whereas the last council was at a really brisk walk because you had several people on board who'd been there for quite some time, and it's just trying to get them interested in what it is that we do without them realising that there's a lot of dry biscuits that they've got to chew their way through, or perhaps an entire large box of wheat bix sometimes. But the fact that they do it, and it's not just for a badge that they get to wear around school, the fact that they're turning up to stuff every fortnight and engaging in their online discussions is a real credit. I think they'll find now that they've sorted out what they're going to do for the year, that they haven't actually got much time left until the year finishes at the beginning or early mid-November, I think. School seems to stop a lot earlier these days from what I recall. I'm pretty sure we were right up to Christmas Eve. But it was really nice to see that they went through, and that I know that there are some councils that have questioned whether or not the voice of youth council is worth it, because there's a cost, and I know cost is something that we've had to think about with our youth council, but absolutely it is an investment in our process and in our future. So it's great that they signed into that.
Through you, Chairman, may I ask, and it's a question of you actually, because I don't know. At the moment, what commitment did we give Youth Council about longevity? I mean, do we approve 3 years, or do we approve 1 year at a time?
They appoint themselves. As an appointment process that people apply and go through, which...
No, I was meaning funding.
Funding, annual plan, year by year by year.
So, I mean, I just wonder, I don't know what the mechanism would be, whether to add some security, given everything that you've said, I think probably every councillor would echo, whether there's a mechanism where we can guarantee 3 years or something rather than individual years.
Does it need to be a financial mechanism, or can it simply be a vote, will we commit to supporting Youth Council ongoing for as long as they are prepared to come forward? I don't see it as a cost thing, unless they want it paid, but Mr. Day.
Thank you. Through yourself, Chair. These are even worse than the ones on the desk. Sorry about that. Just through the correct mechanism is through your long-term plan, but your long-term plan commits your funding for the for that 10 years. But as the Chair has correctly reflected, that can be altered and amended in an annual plan. So there's only a firm commitment in relation to an annual by annual basis. But the council does and did go through endorsing continued funding in relation to the long-term plan. So in principle it's supported, and you reconfirm your commitment to it at each annual plan.
So maybe, again for you, Chair, that there's some non-financial commitment that can be made, at least in principle, that would give some longer term commitment. I mean, I've never really quite thought it through, but just reflecting on the letter that's written and the fact that, you're only ever 1 year away from it the most.
Reflecting on what Mr. Day had to say, the financial commitment over a 10-year period and a long-term plan is far greater than a period that we as a council can commit to, because the next council can obviously change that. But if they recognise that there is financial provision provided for its continuation for the duration of the long-term plan, and that this council remains committed to supporting their continuing, that would be a way through. I mean, it forms part of the minutes, but I guess the resolution can be, we received the report, and the committee notes the desire of for council to continue to support Youth Council, at least for 10 years through the long-term plan, but at least for the duration of our triennium.
So, Mr. Chair, may I suggest that we actually move it to be, or word it to be, that we renew our commitment at the beginning of each triennium? So that would actually be a 3-year.
I think organisationally we have to remember to renew it.
Yes.
We can't commit to renewing it because we can't tell the next council what to do.
As a matter to put before each incoming council?
Again, the resolution doesn't mean anything, but I think from an operational perspective, if it just becomes embedded in our process of, those first couple of bedding in meetings, it's a good point. Commitment. So we don't renew the commitment of funding. We
Of existence.
confirm our commitment to the continuation of the Youth Council. Through this triennium, and recognise that funding provision is made for 10 years through the long-term plan. Comfortable with that?
Yep.
Steve? I'm not asking for comment, I'm looking for a mover.
Yeah, sorry, I was just reading the second one. Yeah, great.
I'll second.
Okay, thanks. Move Steve, seconded Tom. Look, really useful discussion, and thank you for that. I'll put the motions. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Active Communities Fund. I don't have a conflict, although obviously I have an interest because I'm Council's representative on this. This is a process that we used to administer through our in-house through the Active Communities Committee when we had it. we passed the money over to Sports Southland to administer. I've worked with the committee over the past 18 months to help them bed in and be aware of what it is that the fund is able to or not able to be used for, and reminded them that it is a finite amount of money, and that part of what they need to consider in the allocations is sustainability, because this is money that came from Sport New Zealand, or the Hillary Commission as it used to be. The uptake has been very good, and the focus of the mahi very strong. The only shortcoming, and it is reflected in the report from Active Southland on page 28 of Board Books, is that in their efforts to try and assist council in administering the fund, and people do see them as a much easier go-to from a sports perspective than the Invercargill City Council, is that they didn't allow for what it actually costs them to administer it. So from the fund, there's a suggestion there that $10,000 per annum be used, and I'll tell you what, that won't cover it either, but be used to help cover off their administration costs as part of that recommendation, which I think I'm quoted in there as supporting it, so I'm certainly not going to change that position. But has anybody got any questions on the report? Leslie.
It's not exactly a question, it's a comment. I don't have a conflict either, but I also have an interest because I used to chair Council's Active Communities Fund Committee. And I do just want to say that it's been really good to see that the handing over of the old Hillary's Commission money in this way has been very successful and has fulfilled what the Active Communities Committee intended would happen with an organisation that was very appropriate to be the husbanding of that money for the future. So I'm also quite supportive of the management fee necessity. When Active Communities was in-house, we obviously had staff who were administering that committee and doing a very good job of doing that. There is a fair amount of work in it, and I think it is only fair that that is now in there. So I also support that.
Evelyn.
I was going to speak in support of, I think it's sensible of them to have come to the realisation that they do need to have some return for the work that they do. And I also want to comment on looking at the really wide variety of things that they've done, but particularly noting things like the sports chaplaincy, because I think we know that particularly in high performance sport that it's quite a valuable service, but at all levels of sport there will be times when people need that. To see that they've thought about that and have invested in it, I think is quite comforting. So if you need a seconder for the motion, I'm happy to.
There might be a second addition to the motion. I need to recognise that Jess Domigan, who chaired it, did an outstanding job and was very flexible and very open. She's now with Community Trust, and I think Steve Gear is going to be administering it in the interim anyway. But one of the things that the committee had to come to terms with, and I'm, the nagging conscience in the background, is when you get a funding application from an organisation, and a lot of organisations are going to Active Southland, but now being directed in the right fund, because they've got another fund that they administer to Manawa, I think it is, and they're finding the best fit for the organisations that are coming for them. So that's really good. But for those that are applying to this fund, they also need to be reminded that actually, what's the Invercargill portion?
Yes.
Because that's all we can cover off. Because if half of your participants are from outside the district, sorry, but that's not what we can pay for, and that's a hangover to that Hillary Commission condition that's been there. So there's a recommendation that the report is received, and can we add to that, and that the committee endorse Active Southland making
apply
use of
an individual fee.
having a $10,000 management fee to come from the fund per annum.
I'll move that way.
There's a $10,000 management fee to come from the fund per annum. No, but it's all they asked for.
And they've asked for it from the interest,
Yes.
yes.
And sorry, just to be clear, Chair, we're talking about a lump sum management fee. We're not talking about cost recovery.
No.
So we're not asking for invoices or anything of that sort. It's just $10,000 lump sum management fee.
So it is, the cost to Active Southland will be larger than that, but they recognise the public good that they get from it as well, so I guess they're co-investing with us. So the second one is the committee endorse Active Southland receiving, not managing, a $10,000 management fee from the fund. So, sorry, who moved?
I'll move that.
Leslie and Tom.
So through you again, Chair. In terms of our various policies in this regard, are we able to approve a management fee? I support it being presented that way, just straight lump sum $10,000. But is there any complexity around policies that we don't receive, invoices or anything of that sort?
Well, we're endorsing it because we've handed, the former Active Communities Invercargill Fund handed the entire fund over with an agreement.
Okay.
And actually part of that agreement was at some time in the future when Active Southland had time to bed in how it was operating, there would almost certainly be the need for
Yeah.
a
I mean, it
management
sounds
fee to be
completely
agreed.
reasonable to me, Leslie. I just
Yeah.
don't want to find that it conflicts with something in, in our policies.
Patricia, is there any financial conflict for us?
I was just going to say exactly the same thing as Councillor Soper just has.
Wonderful, she respects your position. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Wellbeing Fund review, up to date on the framework and the frequency.
Right, me again. So the Community Wellbeing Fund has had another very, very successful year. 6 rounds of the grant process took place between in the 23-24 financial year, and we have seen a significant rise in the popularity of the fund this last financial year. In total, $568,000 has been allocated throughout the year, which did include 3,600 that was partially returned from a project during the year. In total, 88 applications were received and 63 of those were funded, which is quite a rise from the last financial year, where I believe it was around 41 applications that were supported. Halfway through the financial year, the committee made a change to the scoring matrix in order to align it with the current long-term plan strategic decision-making framework, and a sustainability score was added, and the livability score was split between social and cultural well-beings. And as in previous years, we have seen more applications scoring highly on the social and cultural well-beings compared to the economic and environmental well-beings. There's an infographic attached to the report which does provide a further breakdown of how the funding was allocated, both in terms of the application numbers as well as the dollar value. And that infographic will be made available online to our community, as well as a full list of the projects that were funded. At the 25 June, on 25 June, the Community Wellbeing Fund Subcommittee held its annual review, and 3 minor changes were proposed to the framework, and they were outlined in here. Those changes include, well, first is to exclude commercial activity, with the exception of some events and community activity. The second one is to provide clarification that applicants have 12 months to spend their grant, and their third one is that any underspent applications must be returned unless except at the committee's discretion. So all of those have been noted in the draft framework appended. And one other change that was made is to increase the amount of grant spend per person to score event applications from $20 to $30.
Thank you, Adina.
Happy to take any questions.
Pania.
My question is really around, after reading the framework and everything, was in the focus around the city centre. Is this fund extended to Bluff as well, given that we sit within Invercargill City Council boundaries? I'm just really confused because
Short answer, yes.
Yes. So is there any opportunity to actually have something targeted towards improving maybe the
You want a
the
single
main
fund for
street of
Bluff?
Bluff? I don't know, beautification of the main
Short
street
answer for that,
projects.
no. Because that's an infrastructure thing, which is council's decision,
Yeah,
and it's not for councils
I mean in
to apply
projects.
for the fund. Well, it's still largely infrastructure. Well, yeah, they can
Projects.
place a bid with anything else. You know, they have, even though it kind of falls back to a city with heart of the city, there are many different ways of interpreting the heart of the city. The heart of the city is also the people within it.
Absolutely.
And so while we look for stuff that might be happening within the CBD, that's not to say that something happening on the main street of Bluff isn't of equal significance or importance. Infrastructural projects might be more of a change, and from what I understand, commercial projects are now out. And that's good because it's,
But social and cultural projects exist within the livability of the township.
it's welcome to apply with anything else. We're not going to.
I just seen us absent within the actual framework.
That it's not stipulated means that it applies. Because the framework quite often looks to say what you can't do. And an example of that is the previous fund was the events committee. Councillor Kett was on that for quite some time. And one of the things that we figured out that we had to change was if your event was a fundraiser, you couldn't apply for funds.
Correct.
Because we provided $10,000 funding for one event that ended up being the same amount that event donated to a charity, so we ruled that out. So looking to plug some of those gaps is part of that review. Trudy.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Mrs. Coote, I hear what you're saying. The funds aren't restricted to they're restricted to the Invercargill City Council's boundaries, or Bluff and Invercargill City Council's boundary. And so we can look I'm looking to my marketing and communications manager to look at how we can make sure that our funding rounds are well publicised in all areas, on all mediums, so that we can encourage different members of the community to apply.
Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I was just going to say to help Pania to know that Bluff is definitely in there. Just in the last few rounds, we've supported the Bluff Oyster Festival, the Fovo Pearls marching, the Maui. I think the Maui Land Care Group, the Bluff RSA, the Te Ara Akiwa Wakaama Trust. We definitely get a lot of applications from Bluff, and they are certainly treated very, very seriously. There's no disincentive involved to being a Bluff group applying to the Community Wellbeing Fund.
Yeah, my point was more that it's not reflected in the framework. I understand that we've supported groups. It was just more looking at the framework itself.
Evelyn.
I actually was going to support where Mrs. Coote was coming from, because under the assessment sheet at vision and priority alignment, city centre ranks 10.
Yes.
Now, that is actually in some ways devaluing other parts of the city over what happens in the centre of the city. And I do recognise that the funds are limited and all those sorts of things, but if you were a Bluff person and saw that, you'd think, oh, well, we're already 5 points behind. in that particular part of the thing. Wording is important, and how people perceive what we are judging as being worthy is important. So I understand that this is a recent change, that it might be that the committee didn't realise wholly how it would appear to people outside of themselves, that particular wording and ranking.
I'm aware that the committee chair's not here. Is there anyone else on this committee who's on the Community Wellbeing Fund? Leslie and Peter. Is that something you're able to take back by way of review for their next meeting for them to discuss over the next couple?
Peter and I could, and Steve could certainly take it back. I think just to make the comment that that rating for the city centre was also part of our general encouragement of putting the life and the heart of the city back at the centre of what we were trying to do with our whole inner city
Intention
promotion.
around that.
Yeah, I mean, I get that it reflects the significant financial investment, but I go back to the comment that I made earlier, the heart of the city is not just necessarily a location. It's where the beating hearts gather.
We can certainly take it back.
Great.
There's three of us here who have heard the comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's about clarifying, right? Because you look at the support area proportion, there's no lack of, there's 46 Invercargill, 13 Invercargill and Bluff for reference, and that pie graph is a pretty good picture of who we're supporting in terms of projects, but I think we can clarify. Yeah.
So I think we also need to recognise there's a relatively good number of groups who we support through the fund, which from memory we reduced.
Yes, indeed.
No, we didn't?
Well, at the end of the day, we
So
actually...
we put it back in.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God for that. Sorry, I was away for that very last meeting of the LTP. So there are 5 recommendations. Someone who's not a member of the committee want to move those? Tom, thanks. I'll second. Well, Evelyn. Any other points people would like to make? Steve.
Oh, just quickly, I referenced this in the subcommittee meeting, but because we've got Lisa here, just looking at the infographic, it's such a cool story to tell around what the council is doing. So I know that the website was referenced, but is there a comms strategy? I know you're really, really busy, but is there some kind of strategy around telling the story of projects that the fund is supporting every single year? Sorry, I put you on the spot.
So we do work with these guys to tell all of the success, well, not all of the success stories of from all of our funding. To be honest, I am not sure about the active communities one and whether or not that's something that Active Southland also administer, but that's a conversation that we can have and follow up
Oh, the
on.
community wellbeing.
Our community wellbeing, yes, we certainly do. We've done a collection of videos and stories and things like that.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded then. I'll put that all in favour.
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thanks, Adina. Right, managing the neglected buildings. Welcome along, Anne. This is a follow-on and some clarification from some points that were raised, let me say, again, at the last meeting. So there's clarification in here, again, of the fact that these things have regulatory controls. And I know that the subject was raised again about D Street. And there's an option. You can take the containers away and you go down to one lane. The end. Until the buildings become insanitary or more of a risk to people and the other buildings around, we really are hamstrung. And yeah, it's frustrating. But is there anything in the paper that needs clarification? outstanding. Somebody like to move the reports received, and in amongst there, should we develop further non-regulatory approaches to how we handle this? And what does that mean? How does that look, a non-regulatory approach? What are some examples?
Well, I could draw your attention to the table in the back of the paper, which actually identifies the spectrum of possible approaches, which include regulatory at one end through to non-regulatory. And a good example of that is actually how our heritage program, where we have some regulatory obligations in the district plan, but we also do information and promotion and education, and we have some economic incentives in terms of the heritage program. So there's a range of things we do which are all designed to achieve change. Regulatory is one end, and there's a whole lot of other things. We haven't applied the same thinking to a broader range of buildings, and I guess that's the question. Obviously that would require more resources.
And that was the great point in the paper, just to show that I'd read it. Because the potential costs for each of those options was very cleverly outlined in there. And there are lots of things that would be really nice to do, but we just need to recognise that there's a cost that comes with that. And we've just spent the last couple of months going through a process of, looking at where we can keep costs down. That's not to say that we don't look at every opportunity to try and work with building owners to find resolutions to problems if they come to us, or if we have to go and knock on their door and say, are you aware that that is always the approach that we've taken. Tom.
Well, recommendation number 2 considers whether council should develop non-regulatory approaches. I think it would be very helpful, Chair, actually, to have a paper that describes some options around that.
It's there.
Well, not really. I mean, it's there kind of broadly, but I mean, not in any practical sense. I mean, are there things that we could do, other options that we could undertake? What would the cost of those be? And I don't just mean cost in terms of a lot. I mean, costs in terms of, being able to put a kind of dollar sign behind them. I don't think this paper quite does that. It invites the question, should they be asked to do it? So, and my response, I think, would be yes.
So, and I understand that position, but like some other things that we've talked about, it's about how far can we go?
Sure, but the recommendation number 2 asks whether council should develop non-regulatory approaches. It answers the question. My view is the answer is yes rather than no.
So, going on some of the suggestions, do you want an opportunity through a workshop to go through those and to flesh out what the potential resource and monetary costs are?
Well, that'd be a very helpful approach.
Okay. Because they're real, and that's fine, but in the end, I come back to there's only still so much we can do unless we want to pay for it. And there's a part of me that says I'm not interested in throwing ratepayer money into somebody's property investment, just because they might be slow to respond. I'm not talking about any current situation, it's just something we've had to deal with. Or out of town landlords, which again can be a problem in trying to track them down. But I think fleshing some of those out through a workshop might be useful. Leslie.
I just want to support the idea of a workshop fleshing that out. I mean, we all know we've got the heritage strategy in place, and because of our attempts to be to keep our rates increase as low as possible, we elected not to put additional money into our heritage strategy this time. I do think at least it would be useful to workshop and just have that discussion about these ideas. Yes, they are very costly. We've committed to the heritage strategy having some cost to it because that is important to Invercargill as a whole, but I think it's probably time to at least have a workshop to discuss what we might be able to extend, or perhaps we could also put into that at our next budget cycle, investing some more in the heritage strategy and slightly widening the buildings that might then be eligible.
Jonathan, what's the possibility of looking at where we can timetable a workshop like that?
So, through yourself, Chair, we can look into finding a gap for a workshop. Would it be more practical to amend recommendation to, in those terms, as to come back with a workshop to look at non-regulatory options?
Yep, so rather than considers whether council should, that council workshops, the development, the feasibility of non-regulatory options.
Keeping in the noting that
Just
this
like being
would
at a
require
disco, isn't it?
allocation of additional resources.
Non-regulatory options for addressing neglected buildings. And we delete 3. You moving that, Tom?
Yes, thank you.
Seconder?
I think
Me.
we need to leave in the part of the phrase that says noting that that this would require allocation of additional resources. I think that.
Well, that'll come
framework
up at the
needs to be
workshop, one would hope.
there.
By way of an update, I guess just to let you know that the remit application, which was attached as an appendix, it has been accepted by Local Government New Zealand to be considered at the AGM. So.
Tom and I will look forward to that. Okay, it's been moved and I've seconded those 2 recommendations. I'll put that, all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you for that. Thanks, Anne. We're at the Bluff Hill Matapohui Active Recreation Precinct proposed trail names and park name. Mr. Bowen, please assume the red chair.
Terms of here. We'd slightly have one, entertaining nonetheless.
Do you want to provide a quick outline before we move into it, Chris? Just so that we don't end up revisiting all the suggested names. Draw the life out of the dead.
Kia ora whānau. Thank you, Darren. So the paper that you've got in front of you outlines the process that we've undertaken with regards to the naming conventions for the Bluff Hill Matapohui Active Recreation Precinct project. To remind the elected members, this is a joint funded project from MB as well as ICC funds for this. In communication through Te Ao Marama Incorporated and local Runaka, we've actually discussed a variety of names to be presented for the existing trails and the new trails. In addition to that, we've also worked with other partners on the hill with respect to the Bluff Hill Environmental Trust that also do a lot of work, so they've also presented a couple of names. This was presented at the Bluff Community Board back in June, which was seconded and moved, and so one of the next steps in that paper was to bring it to this council before signage and everything else was constructed.
Thanks. Sorry, thanks, Chris. And I think that's a key point. All the key partners were a part of this process up to what was adopted and recommended to us by the Bluff Community Board, and I don't want to dilute their voice at all because they know their town better than we do, or they're part of our town. And so I'm really keen to support that, but I'll not be the one that moves the motions. I'll leave that open.
I'll move.
Thanks, Tom. And Pania seconded, didn't you?
Yes, you did.
Yes.
Because you beat me.
Put that all in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Phew. Donovan Park Master Plan. Cassie, come on down. Join Chris. So the report's a summary of where we've been, why we've been there, and where we are at the moment. I'll hand over to you two.
Kia ora, thank you. Look, the last time we were talking to you about this project was January 24, when we discussed the emerging themes that was going to go out for consultation as part of the LTP. The master plan, which has been developed, implements these emerging themes through different zones: the sport and recreation community zone, cultivation zone, water and nature, or the blue-green network, events area, and agricultural area. Prior to that, in August 2023, we also discussed whether there was any of this land that was surplus to requirements. Through technical information gathering, feedback from our community, and also analysis of internal strategies and policies, we've confirmed that there are useful outcomes for the Recreation Reserve of Donovan Park. Also, in the appendix of this paper, there's a draft implementation plan which outlines the streams of work that would be required to implement the outcomes identified in the Donovan Master Plan. The Master Plan and the implementation plan are intended to be used when the Reserve Management Plan is renewed, and that's one of the recommendations within this report.
Thanks. And I think it's important to recognise in not just the recommendations, but this committee's recommendations to council, that recommendation 8 supports starting a process that some of the council have been talking about, and that's really all we can do at this point, starting that process, letting the process take place and fall however it will. But I think it's important to note that the master plan process has not stood in the way of, and in fact has ultimately enabled that discussion to happen. So I think that's really useful to be able to clarify. Tom?
On that point, Chair, I found it difficult to rationalise recommendation 6 and recommendation 8, in as much as council have in the past contemplated how particularly the east end of the farm part may be usefully used in the future, which you've referred to. There's no decisions been made, but we've contemplated that. If we approve the master plan, which projects uses for the park, which clearly do not involve any of those things as far as 30 years out, then I just struggle how I can rationalise that. Given that the master plan is not a legal requirement, it's something that we have chosen to do. It's a guide for the future, but we're not obliged to do it. But there is a kind of moral obligation. I mean, to me, if we approve a master plan that shows in 30 years' time that that area is still a park, and then at some point in the not too distant future contemplate whether there might be other uses for it, that seems to me to be, kind of morally conflicting, if nothing else. So I mean, I have problems. I guess with the concept that we approve a master plan on the one hand with the full 30-year master plan with the full knowledge that we're going to contemplate other uses, probably within months.
So I look at it differently in that the master plan shows and works on the feedback of what's going on and where it happens, but it also lays the bed essentially for 8, because you can't plan for something that you don't actually have a direction on, or even an idea, a firm idea. There have been things talked about, but even how that's executed, I've heard change a bit in discussions around the room. So I don't think it stops it, but it is part of a chain, and it's a really important chain, because
if I can go back on it,
if it's contested at some point, if we haven't joined the dots properly, it could fall over.
So we don't actually need to have a master plan. The problem I have, sorry to come back to you on it, Chair, but the problem I have is that just ethically, if we as a council, or as a committee anyway, recommend to council adoption of a 30-year master plan that clearly shows that it will still be being used as a park in 30 years' time, just ethically, how can we then turn around? Surely the public can expect that that's, if we voted for that, that's how we are going to behave going forward. And if we consider that we may not, then I just feel very uncomfortable approving the master plan. Given that we don't have to, there's no regulatory requirement to have a master plan. This is something that we're doing as an option. So in other words, I think our vote on this, whether we vote for the master plan to recommend adoption, actually does mean something.
Leslie?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I gave this a bit of a consideration, and I believe we can reconcile the two, because if you look at the draft implementation plan on page 567 of our board books, it very clearly has the D5, alternative land use. Determine whether part or all of Donovan Park may be surplus to the Council's requirements for reserve land in accordance with the Reserves Act 1977 requirements. Deal with this prior to reviewing the reserve management plan, and we've clearly ticked that as priority 1 in the 2023 to 2026 space. So in my mind, as a councillor, and in my mind as a lawyer, we have provided in there for exactly what we're talking about. And we've highlighted that to anybody who is going to read our Donovan Park Master Plan and its draft implementation plan, that we have provided in there that we are going to look at the possibility of some part or all in fact is the wording, being surplus to our requirement for reserve purposes. So to me, we have reconciled the recommendations
Yep.
in that.
But I still hear Tom's concern, and I wonder if for recommendation 6, if the word note rather than adopt is used at the beginning, Tom? How would you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I certainly would prefer that, and just picking up on Leslie's point, I mean, I do notice it's mentioned in the way through, but I think rather than thinking about the legal court, I suppose I'm thinking about the court of public opinion, really, Leslie, that if we adopt it, then to me that actually means something. I don't think we can then turn around in the next few months and talk about unadopting it, given it's a 30-year strategy. The word no is makes me a lot more comfortable.
Okay. Evelyn?
So looking at this, it highlights to me some things that, and Councillor Soper and I were just talking briefly earlier, that having the layout the way that it is gave me a clearer idea of what potentially we could see in terms of, say, events use, which I had not considered. So is it an open space that can, apart from show jumping, eventing, all those sorts of things, if the community are aware of the size of the space and the potential for it, would we see that there was more options? I think the point of having the master plan is you've pulled all this together in a place, you've put pros and cons and options. It's for the public to actually confirm to us, because it's their space, what they prefer us to do. And selling land is included in there. It's not my favourite thing, but that's not for me to say that that's what the majority of the citizens want or don't want. Giving it in this format, and I don't see that noting it as acceptable. I would have liked to have seen us adopt it, because it means that we're acknowledging that what is in here is actually factual. It gives us a direction to go, and still council, after submissions, can make different choices, because it gives us the information and the options to do it, and it gives the public the information and options. And just to note something that I saw at the beginning, which talks about the original Potocarp forest that was part of Tauraki Te Waru, which the remnant of that is Thomson's Bush. So if people remember that where that went to actually once was a forest, and what we have left is Thomson's Bush. if we dispose of this, there is something else that we do not have left.
Question of curiosity, did it once connect with the bush area in Anderson Park as well?
It did indeed.
Thank you. Leslie?
Thanks, Mr Chair. I was just going to point out that recommendation 6 is actually a recommendation to council that we adopt the master plan and the draft implementation plan for public consultation to be undertaken.
Yep.
I don't think we can replace the word adopts with notes and still achieve what we're intending to achieve. Because it's recommended to council that we adopt it for
Consultation.
Yeah, so I think, and that's why I was pointing out what it says in the
Right.
implementation plan about the all or part being for consideration for surplus. So that's part of what we're asking. in the
Thanks, Leslie.
consultation that people
That's
come
really
back
helpful.
with.
So it clarifies what we're adopting the master plan for.
Exactly.
We're not adopting the master plan
No, we're not
per
adopting
se,
the master
we're
plan
adopting
today.
it for
We're adopting
consultation.
it we're recommending to council adopting it for consultation with those parts in it,
Right.
which say, and I pointed out one of the places that says it very clearly, but there's other places which say that there is contemplation of all or part being surplus to reserve requirement.
That's super useful. Thanks. Steve?
Thanks, Chair. I guess I have some concerns around the term again, adoption. Moving forward, I guess just take me back to the consultation process. And I know that the big question, I know it's got to be blue sky. I know you can't lead the community too much on this, but the big question was, what do you want for the future of Donovan Park? So can you just, I guess, remind me, how do we make clear that Donovan Park was potentially larger than what I think the majority of the community understood it to be, myself included, and from the conversations that I've had, because I think that surplus 37 hectares is really important in that narrative, and my concern is that we didn't capture that some of those unknown variables of what Donovan Park is to our community.
Sometimes you can sell someone fish and chips and they don't realise what comes with it. In that there are some people who are really aware of all the different parts of Donovan Park, but for most of them who don't visit it, they might go there once a year if for the A&P show. They're never going to pay more attention.
Would that awareness have potentially changed some of the feedback? I guess it's just something that's probably bugged me throughout this process, so I'm just probably voicing it too late. But
So Leslie, just coming back to the point that you were making before, can I get your feedback on this? Because you were right to suggest the removal of noting, but do we call it, if we adopt because it's still actually a draft, do we adopt the draft Donovan Park master plan for public consultation?
That would be a way, I think, of meeting Tom's point, and it would be a way of making it abundantly clear to the public, not only the ones watching us today, but anyone else, that it's a draft plan that we're adopting recommended council to adopt for consultation. So yes, I think that would
Still
that
a
would
work in
achieve
progress.
what we need.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Tom?
I think Councillor Soper's point's very helpful, but it still doesn't quite get me over the line, because the master plan as it exists is not a neutral document on that point. It does mention through it that there is maybe consideration for other uses, but 99% of the document is about what's clearly expressed as a preferred use. There's maps about 30 years from now, this is what we're going to do. And, there's no map that says 30 years from now it might be different. It might be, housing on the eastern side. So I think that document as it sits at the moment, if it was adopted to go for consultation, and if it goes out to the public, then if I was a member of the public, I would read it that that was what we were supporting as a council, was that it was, well, actually, as it explicitly describes in the document, with maps and charts and, timetables, and so I still have unease about it. And it might be that it just comes to the vote, Chairman, but I think by adopting the master plan, and I think, a non-legal eye reading that would read it as you're adopting the master plan. I did take the point that Councillor Soper's making, but I mean, that's what it says. You're adopting the master plan would say that this council approves what we are showing to the public, which is, you know, that it remains a reserve through the 30-year period. So I feel uneasy about it still. I don't know quite what the way you would get around it. I just observe again that there is absolutely no requirement on us to develop a master plan. This is something that we are that we have decided to do of our own volition. There is a requirement to develop a 10-year plan, as I understand it, regulatory requirement, but the master plan is an optional thing for us. And I just don't support adopting a master plan which may be or may not be reflective of what council decides at some point, and they're not necessarily in a too distant future. It could well be it's still out for consultation when we, you know, decide to go in a different direction, which I think would be a bit silly, actually.
Pania.
I just want to say, even though the master plan is not a legal requirement for the council, but a master plan is actually good practice. And I have to support what Ms Cook said in the sense that it actually provides all the information in one place. I mean, even the origins of Donovan Park, so that our communities can actually have a better understanding on what they would want to see that in the future. So I think the plan's well written and I support it.
Evelyn.
So just addressing perhaps the Deputy Mayor's concerns and thinking how we have done things in the past, isn't it all about the questions that we put around each part of the document as it goes out, the plan? So this is what is there now, this is what the potential we think might be, what do you think? And not have it presented as a fait accompli, but asking at each stage, at each place, each part, asking the community what their preferences are, but being actually a little bit more narrowed down than just what do you think of the future of Donovan Park. So actually looking at what do you see the importance of keeping an inner city farm, or do you see the necessity for a space for eventing in the showgrounds or whatever, because I think open questions will encourage people to think openly, but targeting to certain parts might actually help the decision making rather than looking at the plan as just one whole document that all has to be agreed to en masse. But also acknowledging that we are recommending this to go to council. So in actual fact, all we at this point are doing is sending it up the line where we'll talk about it all over again.
Barry.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Tom. I'm a wee bit nervous about this because we're going to be, public's going to perceive that we're quite happy with the way everything's going here, and we're taking away a couple of options which we have already talked about the housing side of it. And so it just makes me a wee bit nervous
So
with
just
that word adopt.
sorry. So just before I come to you, Leslie, what if we kind of flipped the words around and started with, for public consultation to be undertaken, the committee recommends council adopts the draft Donovan Park master plan. So that's stating up front why the draft is being adopted. Leslie.
Thanks, Mr Chair. That might be a good way to make it more obvious for the public. The other thing I wondered would be whether it was worth considering in the document that went for public consultation an additional map or a couple of additional maps that highlighted the potential area being considered because at the moment for a member of the public who hasn't thought a lot about Donovan Park in the last while, it's a bit different than us as councillors, but for a member of the public to look at the current maps and think, where is the potential housing development possibility, is a bit difficult. So in a lot of minds it becomes, they're talking about selling the whole of Donovan Park and only keeping the duck pond type thing. If there was perhaps one or two additional maps that highlighted that this is the potential area that could be sold for development, I think it would probably help some of the public in the public consultation to see that we're not talking about the entire Donovan Park site. We're not talking about the part of the site that's right next door to the Waikiwi Rugby Club. We're not talking about the road that goes through to Anderson's Park. Yeah, I just think another map or two might be helpful.
On page 137, maybe that one could be altered.
There's several maps that could potentially, I mean, we can leave it up to start, but there's several maps in there that I think could probably be highlighted, duplicated, an additional map added that just had that potential. Overlay or something. An overlay.
Just look at the option.
Note that, Tom. I'll come to you in just a moment. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Darren, and through you, Chair. I just want to point out that during the consultation period for the master plan, housing was a very hot topic, and we had maps up front and on the table during all of the consultation, and it was actually some of the feedback we received the strongest from our community, and so it was front and centre in the consultation when, for example, we're sitting at New World and having those conversations. When we're sitting at the farmers market, we're having those conversations with our community. It was front and centre of people's minds. We had maps there to promote the conversation to head in that direction, and I support that during the consultation period for a reserve management plan review, that this is a foundational document that we're using to engage, so that conversation will still be live.
Cool.
Thank you.
Tom?
So I think what Evelyn and Councillor Soper said last, I think, is very helpful. I mean, I do think that the document requires a greater level of balance to make it clear to the public that we are still contemplating, other options. And I know it's mentioned in it, but it's quite buried. I mean, it's not exactly, it's not balanced in that respect. So I would prefer the document to be taken away and brought back with the sort of things that Councillor Soper was talking about, maybe a map and a bit more, just the wording written. I mean, how many people who attended those consultations would know, for example, that population is probably going to increase by another 5,000 in the next few years. We already have a serious housing problem. We have nowhere to put those people. How many would know that what they call Donovan Park is actually much larger than Queen's Park? I think 10 hectares larger than Queen's Park, if I remember correctly. It's huge. But the reality is that part which is used as a park is actually only a third of it. So I mean, there are things like that I'm not sure are clear, and certainly not clear in the document that we have at the moment. So I would,
We're getting close to predetermination, though. But
pardon?
It can start to sound like predetermination.
Well, this is predetermination because the document we have at the moment, 100% is about it continuing to be in a park in 30 years' time. So anyway, I would propose that we see a different version of this document, which might still 98% be the same as this one, but has consciously been provided in a way that provides a little bit more balance. And to do that, I would propose we just leave it on the table for this meeting and have it come back to the next one.
Rex?
Thank you, Chair. The comment I'm probably going to make is the draft Donovan Park Master Plan document is prepared based on the feedback that has been received. I'm struggling to reconcile how we can produce a document that doesn't reflect that feedback apart from the feedback that we're hearing today from our committee. So is it an appendix to the document that we provide the committee feedback on what the public have provided, which has formed this document? Is my assumption correct, Chris, that this document, as per the cover report, shows that this is a reflection and a recollection of the feedback? If you're saying that the process is flawed and doesn't provide a good summation of what we went out to consult on in developing a master plan, that's a different conversation. If you're saying that the draft master plan document doesn't reflect some of the committee's consideration around housing, potential housing for the area, my suggestion would be we need to bring a separate paper back with respect to the housing matters that could be developed as part of the Donovan Park, which I think Recommendation 8 provides the opportunity to do that. That was the purpose of putting in, Recommendation 8's gone, isn't it?
No, still there.
Supporting initiating the process to consider, which was providing this committee to recommend to council the opportunity to then take that fork in the road to actually initiate a process which is outside of a master planning process. The master planning process is not about looking at a housing development opportunity. There has been, and again, correct me here, Chris, but there has been feedback supporting and not supporting housing, which I think the draft master plan actually sums up quite nicely. So this was actually providing you as a committee the opportunity to recommend to council to adopt for continuation of the master planning process, a process which talked about that draft, but also allows concurrently the council to progress with what has been identified as an opportunity outside of the master planning process to look at what in initiating the process for housing development. Personally, my advice is it can be done concurrently, but if you want it to wait for the other, I don't think it will actually ever get that to meet. But that would be something that would come through, and we would just stall the process, which would be stalling both processes. It would also be stalling the option to initiate the Recommendation 8, or that would come back separately as well.
Michael.
Thank you. Through yourself, Chair, and in support of my staff and the review, I think to clarify you probably need to look at page 161 in relation to the 30-year map, because that gives you some clarity in relation to what you're actually talking about with recommendations 6, 7 and 8. Because 6 talks about the whole master plan in relation to taking it out for consultation in relation to the master plan and the implementation plan. When you go to recommendation 7, it's talking about the approach in relation to the management plan, and one of those is actually to look at an alternative uses component as one of those aspects in relation to the section to the right, I think, is the scenic drive and park entrance. The land to the right of that is what recommendation 8 is referring to, which is around supporting the initiation and process for council to consider. That's why I think you need to look at all 3 recommendations as a committee together, but I think for the committee to actually understand what that means, and it's actually how I went through it, was to look at page 161 of board books to really understand what that actually meant. And that showed me the areas that were concerned in relation to that. So I'm just suggesting from a council perspective, maybe committee perspective, you need to look at that, Chair, to reflect on that. It is what my staff have just been saying in relation to that, so it is in support and gives you a more visual representation of that, and does support what the councillors and the Deputy Mayor have been indicating.
The vehicle for change is the reserve management plan, though. And that's what we need to keep in mind. So, Michelle, my suggestion was for 6 that it started with full public consultation to be undertaken. Council adopts the draft management plan and full stop at attachment 6. So that goes back to clearly articulating the purpose of adopting the draft plan. And as Michael said, there are 3 key steps in there as well, 7 and 8. Chris?
I just want to talk through and point out recommendation number 5 that's on the screen in front of you, because we absolutely acknowledge and identify that the agricultural zone and the events area are the areas with the highest potential for alternative land use. So I just want to point that out to illustrate that we are talking about this and it is front and centre. Thank you.
Thanks. And as a part of that, our considerations need to be for that to continue. Where would it if there were change? Leslie?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say that with the change you've suggested to 6, and with 5 and 8 in there, and with the assurance that 8 would mean...
Where's the rest of 8 gone, Michelle?
So when 8 is restored, 8 would allow those alternative or additional maps highlighting the areas that are already highlighted in 6, the agricultural and event areas. I think we've got to the reconciliation point.
We'll just get that change up there. So let's go through. Oops.
So, Chair, that would get that number 8 would get me over the line.
So let's have a look at the first 5, which are the recommendations for this committee, that we receive the master plan. 1, 2, receive the feedback that was provided. 3, receives all the submissions and the summaries. 4, acknowledges the draft implementation plan, which is attachment 6. And 5, acknowledges the agriculture and event areas are areas with the highest potential for alternate land use, including residential housing. Let's do those 5 first. Evelyn?
I'll move.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Put that. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Right, let's have a look at the next 3. So 6 becomes, for public consultation to be undertaken, Council adopts the draft Donovan Park Master Plan. You couldn't tell I speak for a living, could you? And draft implementation plan. 6, we understand that. 7 hasn't changed, and 8 is back in its original form. So
I'll move those.
Leslie and Pania. I think we've all had a chance to talk through, so I'll put that. All in favour?
So, sorry, Dan, are we moving all 3 at the same time?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless you would...
No, not at all. I would just want to clarify that.
No, fine. So putting all 3, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you for that. And thank you, Chris and Cassie. We now move on to the next stage. Take a moment, if I can, to recognise the significant amount of work that's gone into this. Thanks, Cassie. I know that you're in the driving seat, but you've got a pretty good conductor there as well. And let's continue that journey. Oh gosh, I used the J word, and I hate that.
Thank you.
There was a former All Black coach who used it once. It was a pretty short journey. Councillors, that comes to the end of the agenda. Gosh, I missed this. I thank you for your attendance. For those that have joined us on the live stream, Andrew, you've got to figure out a better way to spend your holidays. But thank you very much for your support through these processes as well. And I'll close the meeting.